So my name is Philip Martin, and I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in LA with Portia Hine. And I hope you've had a chance to meet Portia either at the fairs or here in the gallery. If you have any questions about the work, feel free to email me anytime. It's just info at Philip Martin Gallery. And I am super delighted and so excited to have an opportunity to talk today with Lisa Sanditz. This is fantastic. This is Lisa's first show at the gallery. It's called Hyperaccumulators, and it's pretty tremendous. And so we're going to have a lot of fun here talking about the work and get into a variety of things. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
My pleasure. Thanks. A little bit of a drizzly Friday here in upstate New York. What's the scene out there? What's the weather scene?
Well, it's Southern California. It's May, and it's extremely sunny.
So predictable.
Well, we've had a lot of changes in the weather, and this year has been a rainier one for us. And of course, we'll get into the environment and many other things talking about your show. But no, we're just at the tail end of the plants responding to all the rain and getting ready to get what growth they can get done before they hunker down to the no precipitation of later in the summer and throughout the fall. So do you want to talk a little bit about the show? Perhaps we could start with the title Hyperaccumulators.
Sure. I'm sure some of you that follow us on Instagram or have had conversations are a little bit familiar with it, but the title of the show is Hyperaccumulators, which is sort of anchored in ecology as well as metaphorically used in this sense. So hyperaccumulators, I came to learn a little bit, are a class of plants that survive where they're not intended to, and that can kind of look in different ways. So the sort of first group of hyperaccumulators that I learned about that connected to the show was a type of plant that can survive in soil that has like a really high level of heavy metals, and it leaches out the heavy metals, and actually to the point where if the trees are cut, they kind of bleed this sort of blue latex sap. And those are kind of plants that exist, they're not necessarily in environments that are the result of human contamination, but just in in their own natural environment. And then the other type of hyperaccumulators, another type, I should say, not the other type, are invasive species. So those are plants that are really good at surviving where they're not intended to survive. So it can kind of imply sort of different things in terms of ecology. And then I sort of used that to broaden it to the ability to survive and thrive in adversity in the environment or sort of in daily lives.
And so, of course, it's a perfect metaphor for talking about bigger issues in terms of the environment and also maybe the place of humans and a lot of things that we see in the 21st century. I just turned 51, and so there's a lot of things to think about there. Is it also something that did the idea of hyperaccumulators come to you in some sense while you were even painting? What does that feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a hyper accumulator of colors and marks, and not newsflash, not a minimalist. So that also tied into, and I also think, and to that effect, like it could continue on from this. So it was a good way, sort of conceptually, to frame the work, and then also in terms of the variety of mark making and arranging an image within a frame.
So when you talk about being a hyperaccumulator in painting, what does that mean? I mean, did you know that you were a hyperaccumulator, or did you become one?
Joining Hyperaccumulators Anonymous.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I definitely, I've known that for quite some time. And I think that in terms of, again, mark making and color and also genre and historical references and considerations as well, or even art historical, but also news cycle, just lots
Mhm.
of different influences, personal narratives. And I think in the past, I've sort of maybe pulled apart some of those
Mhm.
ideas, and now they're sort of feel more like they're kind of, it's harder to pull apart the sort of personal narrative and the big global narrative. They're more emotionally and um, politically intertwined.
That's very fascinating and something I want to talk about. Um, but then if you'll just permit me for 1 second, because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. What about also your painting, the painting style itself? I mean, like you break, I mean, to say you break rules doesn't strike me as it doesn't match up in a sophisticated way with what I see in your work. Um, but I find your work to be incredibly dynamic, incredibly exciting. Like you do all these things that seem so risky, and like it's things that just are unbelievable that they work. And it's incredibly thrilling in terms of color usage, perspective. Like, how did all that start? Like, tell us about that. Tell us about your Jimi Hendrix painting style, please.
Oh my God, I love Jimi Hendrix. I always feel like I mean, obviously he's one of the great legends, but
Sure.
somehow he's not as much part of the conversation. Um, I would say he's like so punk rock,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, okay, anyway.
During the
Um,
opening, Lisa did pull a painting off the wall, light it on fire, and kind of do this a little bit. No, just kidding. No, talk to us about it. Like, what is that?
um, gosh, I don't know how it developed, I guess, except that there's so much that I enjoy and am curious about
Mhm.
color, how color influences color, the feeling of touch, there's just so many possibilities to work with that
Yeah,
I just I'm excited to be able to like attempt to put together an image that functions within the frame and then also has some kind of continuity with another image within while using all of the not all of, but many different potential ways of putting together color imagery, um, composition. Um, and I thank you for saying that because I hope that they're wild, wacky, wild, and risky. There's lots of other ways to make paintings too, and will certainly be for me moving forward. But I also think that, there's a certain amount of chaos in daily life,
yeah,
and there's a lot of chaos and vulnerability and change happening in the inner and outer landscape. So like, how
yeah,
can painting also reflect a sense of that without being, like didactic or
yeah,
too pointed?
yeah. Well, I mean, when I talk about it, I think what I mean or what's interesting is, we can use the word wacky or whatever. I don't really, obviously the paintings are not wacky, but there's something about, I think what I find in your work is learning all kinds of new ways to solve problems.
Mhm.
Like, and I feel like I'm still getting into it, quite honestly. I think there's a lot of things for us to talk about. I mean, this has been a show that I feel that I've really been, I've learned so many things in the show, and I still don't even know if I even know what all those things are. But lots of things like, okay, we're going to solve a problem one way, and then, whoa, we're actually solving the problem a totally different way. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
and then, there's some paintings that I will, as you know, from a couple paintings that I'll try. There's only two paintings in this show that I tried twice. So that's one of these, the Super Bloom selfie painting. So that's the vertical painting here, and there's another version of that. So often I have a story or painting I want to solve, and I just do it once, and I feel like
Mhm.
I've solved the painting in a way that feels like it has a complexity of formal language that hopefully is aligned with the complexity of the narrative or idea that I'm thinking about going into the painting. But
Mhm.
and then occasionally I'll try to solve a painting a couple times because I don't quite feel that it's gotten solved it in that way.
Mhm.
or that there's a different way to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I guess, yeah, that. I mean, and then there's also like the horizon, right? There's like the horizon if you're painting with landscape, how to, it's funny
Right.
because these two together are both like horizon, horizon, right? That flat,
Right.
receding into space. But you know, I think how to think about a landscape, like being in the landscape versus painting a landscape,
Right.
the different perspectives. You know, I do a lot of like the perspective, or I think about this perspective from what's the flower's perspective, what's the bee's perspective, what's the bird's
Right.
perspective, what's the, you know, caretaker of the land's perspective, what's the person who's not paying attention at all, they're just tromping through it. And so thinking about how to pull, so pushing and pulling some of the points of focus or you know, sight lines, colors in the painting too.
Would you say that you have kind of multiple points of view in the
Yeah,
paintings? Yeah.
that, yeah, within the painting
Something
and
like this
also,
one, you know, here, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that you have a, well, and so maybe you want to talk, there's multiple, first of all, well, it's almost like there's two bodies of work in the show.
yeah. Thank you for being also, thank you for taking the risk of pulling it together because I really did want to kind of collapse those two together. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, to me, this feels like a very big show. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of other things, and it's sort of interesting that we're kind of coming to this in the webinar itself. But there's, so maybe there's, as you point out, you know, the personal and the world, you know, and these parallels, they're both in the show. So I don't know if we want to talk about that, but this seems like a good example, at least to talk about these kinds of different points of view. Because, for example, I would point I would point out the so this painting's called Grieving Guacamole.
mhm.
It's clearly like, you know, a very big personal scene, you know, whether we're talking about like a Courbet burial at Ornat or some kind of really big feeling moment. And it has that aspect. And there's different points of view. But also another thing that's in this painting is I feel like there's this moment where I as a viewer maybe see the actual guacamole for which the painting is named. And then as I desire to get closer to the guacamole, it's as if it telescopes away from me across the table. Does that resonate at all, what I'm describing?
I mean, I think the telescoping guacamole, I'm not as sure about, but the rest of it, yes. Um, I mean, I think of this, oh, you said Courbet, yeah, I was thinking, I think of this as like, the Bouillard of suburban St. Louis.
Yes.
Not that, you know, not gonna say I'm quite there on the Vuillard level, but like thinking of this sort of, you know, patterned domestic interior, obviously coming from a different perspective than he would in
Yes.
terms of this is me as like a daughter painting a family scene.
Yes.
Um, and I think, you know, dealing with grief,
Yeah.
it was a memorial for my grandmother a number of years back. So I think, you know, and I think since COVID, like thinking about grief and how to manage grief is
Mm-hmm.
more part of daily practice.
Yeah.
So even though this was you know, from a few years back,
Sure.
that distance, I think also helped me be able to talk about it and sort of also think about it metaphorically. And then like the different characters' relationship to the person who has passed and how
Yeah.
the grief, you know, resonates differently to how it's affected them. And then the idea of when you're a person like myself that's family doesn't have like a real strong religious connection, like how do
Mhm.
you manage grief and everyone's a little
Mhm.
bit fumbling around. So whenever someone passes away in our family, there tends to be a lot of guacamole and soda and alcohol and feelings and conversations.
If we
But
could just return also quickly to the the Vuillard in St. Louis, of
mhm,
suburban St. Louis, which
mhm.
is like, you know, that's a t-shirt.
Like we can make that.
I'm not, I think it's entirely possible. What about Vuillard in terms of, you know, some of the things for Vuillard that just might be worth mentioning is just the paint application, the way the fields work, and of course also the way the perspective works, where you're very much in these spaces and located around something that, well, do you want to talk at all? You want to elaborate on the VR point at all? Just because it's kind of interesting. We've not talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're in the act of painting, and I know you know about that too, there's the intimacy of painting itself, right? So, and you think of, he's someone who's like brush stroke, the brush touches the canvas so many times, and so, fastidiously and delicately, and so there's something about creating intimacy, and in that place too. I haven't done so many figurative paintings, like a few, over the last years, but way of connecting that intimacy. I think, I did think of some of the colors of his a little bit in the painting, and the pattern, holding together space through like patterning and shape. Obviously, that to a certain degree in lots of paintings, but and then the framing, that like he would have had lots of table scenes and windows, and then I'm adding in there the TV screen to the like kind of modern framing device.
The TV screen over here.
Yeah, right. TV. Yeah, it's a little harder to see in this image, but there's two windows. The back wall is two windows where you're seeing inside, outside. Then there's sort of a framed painting above the fireplace, and then the TV.
I mean, but there's also so much, because of course now I'm seeing that is obviously a football player on the TV, but it also
obviously the Kansas City Chiefs also.
But it's not the St. Louis Cardinals.
No.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, Cardinals for baseball, Chiefs for football.
The St. Louis Cardinals was a football team before they moved to Arizona.
I know, but my parents are both from Kansas City, and I'm fairly indifferent about football, so we're like, give it to them for this.
Fair enough. But I was also thinking about like the Matisse. For me, I was thinking, for whatever reason, I've been thinking about the Matisse like goldfish thing. So I was kind of thinking aquarium, and also this kind of like bird cage kind of situation. And then this is called Vampire.
Yep.
So what about
any questions?
Huh?
I said, any questions? Yes. I painted this painting after, this is my son, and don't tell him this because he doesn't really know about this and he wouldn't love it. But after going to a roller rink, and he had a giant Slurpee, and he had one from the skee ball machine, fake red wax vampire teeth, and the sun was hitting him, and he pretty much looked like this. And I just, like, that moment, I thought, oh, I wish, Tim was here with the camera. But then I thought, you know what? I'm going, like, the way that the color just is so part of this scene. So sometimes that's what drives the narrative for me. So
do you find yourself, did you work from memory and say, hey, I'm going to paint this? Or did you start painting it and then be like, this kind of reminds me of that? Or
I worked from memory.
So do you often set out with a goal to depict a certain scene, maybe do a drawing, and then?
Yeah, but doesn't, and I think one thing about the domestic interiors, because they are all actual interiors that are familiar to me, so those are a little more grounded in a sense of like structure, color, or objects, whereas some of the landscapes that are maybe more generalized, even the ones that are more familiar, like the ones I paint around here. So
so you're sort of saying that, are you saying that maybe in an interior we kind of know what that space is going to look like, and maybe we have some tools like perspective and some basic drawing to start to figure that out, whereas on a landscape maybe we're starting with less of an idea of what we're actually doing and possibly crossing over into like abstraction, in quotes?
I mean, yes,
figure that out.
Yeah, but I also like that is the case. So in that sense, maybe some of the landscapes have more of a freedom, or less like a driving towards something, less of a vision toward where the end point is going to be. But either way, the color and the touch and brushstroke is always just on its own journey in the making. So I knew like the structure of this. I knew it was going to be this sort of, again, interior, exterior, grandma in the middle of the frame with the plant behind her in the bookshelf, but I wasn't certain about what color everything was going to be. Color shifted. I wanted to call attention to like the McDonald's. I wanted to keep the McDonald's cup, the actual color of that, and other things kind of, push or pull around color wise.
Well, it's also interesting because obviously that's such a like true to the brand color.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how that's a focal point in that sense, and then everything else is like in pictorial, painterly flux around it or something. Is that what you mean by the journey? So to
Yeah,
speak?
exactly. Yeah, like I talk with students too, like about we say local color is like the color of the object that we see it under white light versus
Right.
interpretive or, fauve color or whatever kind of color palette we want to work with.
Right.
Someone pointed out that I have a lot of product placement in my paintings because I have Skittles,
Move
Coca-Cola,
on
McDonald's.
to more product placement.
There we go. Do you think we could get some sponsorship?
Funny you mentioned that. Yeah, Skittles actually contacted us because they were really excited to see this depiction of wildlife eating their product.
Exactly.
It made them really feel like they were contributing to the world.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep, that's Skittle Bear.
So how did this painting come about? You mentioned
this one,
it's the second one.
Yeah, this is the second one. So again, the other painted version of it, the bear was like much more solidly a black bear. This one, obviously the bear color environment is much more morphed. And I think, we all know that animals come across a lot of human food in their environment, and that bears in particular are good at or aggressive at getting it however they can. So for both of the paintings, my kind of idea was that imagining it's sort of like this is like the internal mind of the bear who's their whole life has eaten berries and salmon, and then has Skittles and has kind of like a psychedelic sugar infused shock from the experience. And that was the driving palette for me in this painting, was like, how do I make a Skittle palette painting of an animal in their own environment.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the color in the drawing, especially since you're saying you came back to sort of revisit this painting a second time, the motif a second time?
Yeah, I mean, and here too, I actually did this painting like really quick, most of it really quickly, weirdly, the whole laying down, including I wasn't laying down. The canvas was on the floor and I painted it flat so that some of the paint could kind of pool, again with acrylic, so dried really quickly so I could also get some nice layering of paint. And then I had the bear in there and it just sat in my studio for weeks and weeks, and I really wanted to put a Skittle packet in some way. And like, sometimes with painting, you have to just abandon your initial idea that you had to put in because it's not working and solve it in some other way. But I felt like I can do this. And then, I literally taped a Skittle package on there, and then I was like, okay, maybe this works. And then, but it was so saturated in color. And then when I kind of realized, so it's a hand painted, I looked it's the same size of an actual packet. And then I painted it as if it's faded. So as if the package had been in the sun for 4 years, kind of. And that's so those are the, some of the driving ideas about the color with this.
And do you see this kind of intense color functioning in space, or do you see it more flat?
I know this one, I think it's more flat, which I wasn't necessarily, I don't know. It just kind of ended up this way. Obviously the other paintings have more pictorial depth, but I also like playing around with that too. It's like, it's a painting. You can do anything you want in there or not, right? So you can make it flat and deal with like a real sense of like modern flat abstraction, or you can make it more illusionistic. And, I've been pushing and pulling with that.
So that idea of it's a painting, you can do anything you want in there. Have you always felt that way?
I mean, I think since, pretty much since grad school. I mean, since I kind of had to little more of a sense of what and why. And I was in fact talking about it with undergrad, some of my amazing and inspiring undergrad students yesterday too, like that I'd talking about the idea of like aligning sort of formal interests and the ideas and like
Yeah.
how they work together or push against each other, how they inform the story, how they open up
Yeah.
the story. And then when I say story, the story can be just of color, right? Or it's
Yeah.
more a literal narrative story. So I think after grad school, so that's been, a while now. I've
Yeah.
been thinking of those considerations together.
Well, this is an amazing painting called Hunters. And when we posted it on Instagram, since it was very small, someone's like, this is like a Persian miniature, which I thought was a super
Mm.
cool thing to say, because of both the graphic qualities, a kind of flatness, but a kind of depiction of space. I actually thought that was really interesting. I would point out it's called Hunters, and there are a couple hunters floating
Yep.
around. And there also is some prey down in here. Over
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
I mean, is this an example of story? I mean, tell me a little bit about this painting.
Okay. So this one, it's on its third rotation. It was 3 different paintings. It was a horizontal, then a different vertical, then a different horizontal.
Oh,
No,
interesting.
yes. I think it went 3 different ways. It
Yeah.
was like an exterior painting of something that just a totally different story, which I am hoping to work on that painting again down the line.
Yeah.
And then I really wanted to work with this like heavy, like this is interesting as painter nerds, to the Skittle one, which is almost all synthetic
Yes.
pigments, really
Yes.
transparent, high octane, just
Yes.
like woo, like
Yes.
not fluorescent, but practically. And this is
Yeah.
a
Which
lot
does
more.
contribute to this kind of chemical flatness that we were, yes.
Exactly. And this is much more using a lot more of the earth pigments,
Mhm.
like the umbers and the siennas and all that.
And
Ochre.
meaning that they quite literally came from the earth.
They literally came from the earth. They're still hanging out suspended in plastic because it's acrylic, but there
Sure.
is like they're physically, they're ground down rocks. They're not
Yes.
like crazy colors made in a lab.
Yes.
So
And
and
plant items
plant items. Yeah.
and maybe insects.
Yes. Could be. I mean, it's not maybe. I
But
mean,
most of the time.
yes, used to traditionally be more insects than it is now, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to this painting to the point with the trees, and then but it was just still too like tree. And then
Yeah.
there was orange. I had orange on another painting next to it, and I have this orange sweatshirt in
Yeah.
that I wear
Yeah.
and it just kind of like clicked, and I was like, this needs orange, and it needs these hunters, and we live in a rural area. There is hunting, and it's kind of a reality that you have to wear
Yes.
your hunter's orange. And
Yes.
so that was that. So this was like
Being from
so this is
Indiana,
the
I'm
opposite of
very
like grandma's
familiar.
living room, right? This is like
Yeah.
a real evolution.
Yeah, and there's beautiful moments like this is so wonderful. There's these amazing moments. So usually we run our webinars for like half an hour. So we're
Yeah,
basically done. So we could just
let's
click
wrap it.
off and say goodbye. Or we could also keep going for another 10 minutes or so if you'd like. Does that sound good?
Yeah, how about 5 minutes? Split the difference.
All right, 5 minutes. So we can either go fast or we can go slow.
Whatever you
What
want.
about things we haven't covered that you might like to talk about?
I mean, this is a good painting to talk about,
Sure.
since it's
Go
the
ahead.
name of the show, painting
Yeah.
hyperaccumulators, right?
Mhm.
And a little harder to see by virtue of its darkness, some of the stuff that's going on here,
Mhm.
which I've long liked about painting. Like, I have a great appreciation for paintings that aren't easily reproducible,
Sure.
back to like Walter Benjamin kind of thing, that you do have to experience them. It's fine. We like
Yeah.
all live on Instagram and we see stuff, and I'm glad that provides access to, but
Right.
certainly this one you see a lot more of the depth if you're standing in front of it. And also there are chunks of paint that come 2 inches off of the surface, which you
Right.
really can't see from this. So
Right.
this is the painting of the trees that are kind of oozing the blue paint out of them. That was sort of the sparking point
Yeah.
of thinking about this show.
Yeah. And it's an amazing night painting. And it also reminds me of something like Albert Pinkham Ryder in terms of really, when you look at it, John Joseph Mitchell made this point about Albert Pinkham Ryder that like, you know exactly what he wants you to see and think about. And there's something very interesting about this painting that it's very hard to perceive, but then yet you know very strongly what you're supposed to be seeing. So it's weird because it's like it's actually kind of almost like you go into a dark room and the lights aren't on and you know where the furniture is because you kind of know, but then
Right.
you actually totally don't know. If that, I don't know if that resonates, but
Yeah, that totally resonates. I mean, I think there's a lot of my paintings have lots of points of clarity, even if
yeah,
it's like, I'm telling you all, we're sharing what some of the details and ideas are. People
yeah,
might not make that, assumption on their own, but yeah, there's murkiness here
yeah.
that I think murkiness opens up a lot too in a
Well,
painting.
this painting actually quite literally has a bunch of points because there's like
Yeah.
tons of paint that's like literally coming off the front of it. This
Yeah.
is also called Super Bloom Selfies. So it's related to the one that we saw at the very beginning when we were talking about the install shot. Do you want to talk a little bit about the upside down figures or some of the other parts of this work?
Yeah, sure. So especially those of you in LA probably are familiar with the poppy super bloom. When we were living out there 4 years ago, we encountered it, and it was kind of like right as it was starting to become this it became its own kind of environmental
Did you go
disaster.
to the Carrizo Plain? Is that where you saw it?
The one that's like outside of um the big one where everyone goes. I'd have to look it up. That doesn't sound like the right name, but maybe that's right.
There's
Outside of
different ones.
desert. Yeah. Um, but and then in COVID, it became really a huge problem because so many people came to visit it that it caused like all these traffic problems and environmental problems, and there was just like stomping all over the poppies.
Yes. Right. Yes.
And so many people came to just have selfies there. And there were lots of, in fact, the time we were there was a fashion shoot that day. So I think, for various reasons, put figures at times inverted in the landscape. And sometimes that's like an idea of personal disorientation. And I think of it in this as like also a like not fully attentive relationship to the natural environment, that it's a little
Yeah.
bit like self-serving,
Yeah. This is a beautiful coastline painting. I mean, land use, as you're describing, is a huge part of it. And kind of it goes back into some of the personal and ecological kinds of things we've been talking about. I was actually just listening to a Neil Young song it's on the beach called Vampire Blues, which is
Oh
about
yeah.
oil. It's about oil, but it's like that album On the Beach is pretty early there, or it's like 74. Interesting question just from the audience. Do your titles ever start with, or do your paintings ever start with titles or language?
I mean, I think of the title often. Oh, let's talk about this.
Yeah, we could talk about this.
I often think of the title beforehand, but not always. But
Mhm.
um, yeah. Also
Would you like
because I
to
have a lot
share
of
the title of
ideas.
this painting with people?
This is Mar-a-Lago 2. Is
Mhm.
the rainbow painting next to it in any chance in this order or no?
Of course.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I thought I didn't initially think of these two paintings together. It's not like a diptych, but in a sort of way it is. There you
I'm
go. Look
almost,
at
that's me getting about as clever as I can get on
that.
this.
That's amazing. So they're both the same size. They're about 9 by 12 inches, which I painted them basically the size of a computer screen.
Mhm.
And thinking both of them in terms of like experiencing landscape as a meme or just like within the computer or something that's so part of our popular culture. So,
Yeah.
we see and hear about Mar-a-Lago a lot. And the other one, and I'll get back to that. The other one is the painting, the rainbow, double rainbow, was kind of thinking about that meme a couple of years ago that was the double rainbow. What does it mean? And it's a screen. So both of these are screen grabs where I took a screen grab from the computer and then painted
Uh,
from that. And then I liked them together as like this is like the antidote to the disgusting orange, acridness that's the Trump Trump legacy. And I then added truck nuts to it, which I learned about living up here in a rural environment, which is a way of making things, more masculine. So
it's very helpful.
it was like one of those things I was like,
That's
should I?
sometimes you got to make things clear.
I know.
Do you want to talk about this painting?
Sure. So this
is one of my favorites. Honestly, this helped me understand my own environment. I don't normally do this, but maybe I should. Just like where I live, and I don't know if you can even see it, it's just so stacked and vertical and super crazy that somehow this really helped me in my own way, like understand that strange stacked verticality. Is that part of how you see it, or is it just pictorially how it came together in a vertically format painting? Or
no,
does
it's definitely
resonate?
stacked. The location is this Christmas tree farm on the side of the road, and it does have and the stacking, different than California, but in a way of these like different histories of plant life. And
Yeah.
some are residual and like,
Yeah.
hang out from a long time back, and some are
Yeah.
intended, and some are just like, natural growth. So
Yeah.
there's this completely out of scale single tree that's just like this huge tree that I don't know how wide it's been there. And then there's these Christmas trees that are
Right.
planted over in different, time periods. So they're kind of different areas have this trees of the
Right.
same size. And then there's just all this scrubby landscape. And then,
Right.
so that like provides a place for a painting to just have a lot of movement and patches of color. And then also, I've said this before in different contexts, but in the Western landscape tradition is like, we think of that more in that horizontal format. And an Eastern tradition is more of a vertical format of stacking, not creating a pictorial depth, but creating depth by stacking higher in the picture frame.
Yeah, this has been pointed out to me. Aaron pointed this out, Morse, that the landscape format, as we know it from our printer cues, is horizontal, but the eye actually scans vertically because we're vertically oriented. So when we walk through the landscape, we're actually looking like this so that things don't hit us in the head. And so obviously, say traditional Chinese or Japanese or different Asian painting forms like do address that vertical format. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that.
And also goats have horizontal pupils because they're scanning for predators horizontally.
Yes, that's true. That's interesting. Yes. Well, you have all that stuff with the pupil size. This is an amazing painting of a barge on the Hudson. Wonderful painting.
Thank you.
And then maybe this is almost a good place to end. We're kind of getting here towards this. Do you want to talk about this painting at all?
Yes, as everyone like can exit their own screens. So more and more I'm just trying to think about how to address the domestic life, and parenting life is such a huge part of reality for those of us that have kids, and certainly myself. So like how to kind of think about that. So this is me and my son on a couch at 5:01, both on our devices, me drinking a glass of wine, both of us on a screen. And, I hope that though there's a certain disconnect in that activity, there's also still a lot of ways to connect by just sharing a space with someone and having like, just downtime and like feeling reassured that you're together, that everything doesn't have to be like this kind of epic learning moment. And then we're sort of like sitting in the chaos of all of our chaos.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a place for us to stop.
Beautiful chaos.
Are there thanks for sharing space with me. And if you have any questions about the show, it's up through the 18th. It's a fantastic show. Please come see it. Let us know if you need anything we didn't talk about, or anything you might want to chat about before we let everybody go here.
I mean, I always like to thank the plants.
All right. Well,
Thank the
thank you,
plants. Thank the
plants.
plants. Thanks support team, family, friends, and Philip and Portia.
Yes, and thank you, Lisa. And it's a time when I hope that people are safe and their families are safe. There's a lot going on in the world and political engagement and all that stuff. But it's great to turn to personal expression as a way to think about how we navigate these things. And I really appreciate, Lisa, the opportunity to work with you on this. Is just incredibly exciting, and it's a wonderful, wonderful exhibition.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thanks
good
for listening.
weekend. I'll
Yep.
talk to you soon.